There is a kind of silence that hurts. It is not the silence of a peaceful night, nor the comfortable silence of someone who is at rest. It is the silence that comes after prayer. You close your eyes, speak with God, surrender everything, and then you open your eyes again, and nothing seems to have changed. The problem is still there. The pain is still there. The waiting is still there. And deep in your chest, an almost forbidden question begins to arise. Is heaven still listening? If you have ever felt this, there is nothing wrong with you. This is not a lack of faith. It is emotional exhaustion. It is the weight of waiting for something that has not yet taken visible form. There is a silent pain in those who have already prayed a lot, in those who have already cried into their pillow, in those who have already declared promises, tried to keep hope alive, but begin to feel the flame flicker in the wind of delay. The body feels this waiting. The shoulders grow tense. The breathing becomes shallow. The mind starts creating scenarios of, what if it doesn't happen? And little by little, almost without noticing, the soul enters survival mode. It continues believing, but with fear. It continues waiting, but with a suspended heart. And it is precisely in this vulnerable place that a gentle revelation can be born. In the book of Psalms, there is guidance that seems simple, but is deeply transformative. Enter his gates with thanksgiving. It does not say, enter after the miracle arrives. It does not say, enter when everything is resolved. It says to enter giving thanks, before the answer, before the solution, before visible change. This changes everything, because it places gratitude not as a reaction, but as a posture, not as a consequence, but as an inner decision. When you give thanks before you see, something begins to reorganize within you. Emotional neuroscience shows that the brain does not clearly distinguish between what has already happened and what is deeply felt as real. When you practice gratitude, even in the midst of uncertainty, your nervous system begins to move out of a state of threat and into a state of trust. The heart slows down, the breathing deepens, the body understands that it has not been abandoned. Spiritually, it is as if you are saying, I still do not see it, but I trust. And this sentence, repeated sincerely, has the power to break internal cycles of fear. David wrote, I will bless the Lord at all times. He did not write this while sitting on a comfortable throne. He wrote it in the midst of persecution, threat, emotional wilderness. He gave thanks while still running. He praised while he had not yet seen victory. This teaches us something most of us were never taught. Gratitude is not the end of the story. It can be the beginning. It can be the first step when everything still seems uncertain. And perhaps what has been prolonging certain cycles in your life is not the lack of prayer, but the excess of fear mixed with waiting. There is a delicate spiritual revelation here. Many of the curses people feel are not uncontrollable mystical forces, but repeated emotional cycles. Complaining, discouragement, thoughts of scarcity, feelings of abandonment. These cycles create neural pathways. The more you think in the same way, the more your brain reinforces that internal route. But conscious gratitude interrupts this pattern. It creates a new pathway. It teaches the heart to leave scarcity mode and enter trust mode. It is not denying the pain. It is choosing not to fully identify with it. In the biblical story of Jehoshaphat, before the battle, singers were placed in front of the army, not the strongest warriors. those who praised. This seems illogical to the anxious mind, but spiritually it is profound. Praise opened the way before the victory manifested. Gratitude preceded the miracle. And perhaps today you are waiting to feel safe in order to give thanks, when in fact safety begins to be born after you decide to give thanks. Notice something important. Giving thanks before the miracle is not pretending everything is fine. It is not spiritualizing pain. It is not ignoring reality. It is choosing an inner posture that says, I do not understand everything, but I know I am not alone. And this awareness changes your emotional frequency. It changes your energy. It changes the way you walk through waiting. You stop being someone desperately begging for an answer and become someone who walks confidently, even on uncertain ground. Perhaps you're tired of waiting. Perhaps you're afraid of being disappointed once again. Perhaps part of you is already preparing for the worst as a form of self-protection. But what if, instead of hardening your heart, you softened it with gratitude? What if, instead of waiting for the miracle to finally breathe in peace, you breathed in peace now as an act of trust? Close your eyes for a moment, if you can. Inhale slowly. Feel the air entering. Feel the air leaving. And even without seeing any external change, simply say internally, I thank you. Say it again, I thank you. Not because everything is resolved, but because you choose to trust before seeing. Because you decide to open the door of your heart with thanksgiving. Because perhaps, in this very invisible moment, something is already beginning to move. First within you, then around you. There is a silent blockage that almost no one notices. It doesn't make noise. It doesn't show up as an obvious mistake, but it keeps the heart suspended. It's the idea that gratitude can only come after the change. When God answers, I'll give thanks. When the healing comes, I'll give thanks. When the door opens, I'll give thanks. And while that doesn't happen, the soul remains tense, as if it has been holding its breath for weeks. Maybe you're living like this right now, waiting for a sign, a movement, a confirmation. And in the middle of that waiting, your body starts accumulating microtensions. Your mind revisits the problem several times a day. Your heart swings between hope and fear. That posture creates an internal state of constant vigilance, as if something were always about to go wrong. Emotional neuroscience shows us that when we live in anxious expectation, the brain repeatedly activates threat circuits. Even if nothing is happening in that exact moment, the body reacts as if it were in danger. This is where gratitude before the change becomes an act of liberation. In the book of Psalms, it is written, "It is good to give thanks to the Lord." It doesn't say it is good only when everything is resolved. It simply says it is good in itself, as a lifestyle, as a state of awareness. Gratitude is not merely a reaction to what God does. It is a choice rooted in who God is. And when you shift that foundation, something inside begins to realign. Giving thanks beforehand is not pretending the problem is gone. It's not self-deception. It's not denying the pain. It's declaring that even with the problem still present, God remains sovereign, still attentive, still sustaining you as you walk through the process. That shift in posture changes the way your brain interprets reality. Instead of, I'm alone waiting for something uncertain, you begin to internalize, I am accompanied while something is being prepared. And that difference is profound. Many times, Without realizing it, we keep our hearts closed until the answer arrives. It's as if we're saying, "I'll only relax when everything is okay." But what if inner relaxation is part of the path that allows you to move through this season with greater clarity? Gratitude opens the heart, and when the heart is open, it becomes more resilient. It still suffers, yes, but it doesn't shut down completely. It feels fear, but it doesn't fully surrender to it. There is a simple yet powerful practice that can begin to break this invisible blockage. Even in the middle of your current difficulty, write down 3 real reasons for gratitude. They don't need to be grand. Maybe it's the fact that you're still standing. Maybe it's someone who hasn't given up on you. Maybe it's your ability to feel, to reflect, to pursue growth. When you do this, you train your mind to see beyond the immediate problem. You teach your brain that reality is not made up only of what is missing, but also of what remains. On a spiritual level, gratitude works like opening a window before sunrise. The light hasn't fully entered yet. The sky may still be dark, but the window is already open. The space is already prepared. When the sun rises, it won't encounter barriers. In the same way, when the heart opens before the miracle, it becomes ready to receive what is coming. And even if the answer is still on its way, you begin to experience an inner transformation. Notice something subtle. When you wait to give thanks only after the change, you hand your peace over to circumstances. But when you give thanks beforehand, you reclaim your peace as an inner decision. And this doesn't pressure God. It's not spiritual manipulation. It's alignment. It's coherence between faith and posture. It's saying with your body, your mind, and your spirit, "I choose to trust now." Maybe the great change that needs to happen first isn't external, but internal. Maybe the miracle begins in the reorganization of your perception, in the softening of your breath, in the decision to give thanks, even while your heart is still learning to trust. And as you practice this anticipatory gratitude, something subtle begins to move, not only around you, but within you. And that inner movement is already, in itself, a sign that heaven is still listening. There is a very subtle line between crying out and complaining. Sometimes it's so thin that we barely notice when we've crossed it. We begin our prayer with faith, but little by little, it turns into a repetition of grievances. We repeat the problem. We repeat the fear. We repeat the frustration. And before we realize it, we're reliving the pain before God every single day instead of truly surrendering it. This doesn't happen because we're ungrateful. It happens because we're tired. And when we're tired, the mind naturally gravitates toward what hurts. The human brain has a built-in bias toward threat. It registers more intensely whatever feels dangerous or uncertain. Without awareness, prayer can become just another space where we reinforce the feeling of lack. We speak to God, but we keep telling ourselves, it still hasn't happened. It still hasn't changed. It's still hard. In the account of the people in the wilderness, we see something deeply human. They witnessed miracles. They saw daily provision. They were led step by step. Yet their constant murmuring prolonged the journey, not because God took pleasure in delaying them, but because their hearts remained anchored in fear. The external experience was one of care. The internal experience was one of insecurity, and that inner conflict created exhaustion. Maybe at certain moments, You've also seen small provisions in the middle of your waiting, small signs of care, small answers that weren't the full miracle, but were enough to sustain you for the day. Even so, anxiety may have spoken louder. The mind may have whispered, "It's not enough." And without realizing it, you began repeating that feeling in your prayers. There's a delicate revelation here. Words repeated in discouragement create emotional pathways. When you constantly declare that you're stuck, delayed, or forgotten, your nervous system organizes itself as if that were a final truth. Complaining doesn't change God, but it can harden the heart of the one who complains. And a hardened heart feels less hope, less peace, less awareness of His presence. Yet, there is a simple and deeply powerful way out. When you notice your prayer has turned into continuous complaint, pause for a moment, breathe, then declare a psalm of praise out loud. It doesn't have to be long. It can be a single sentence. When you do this, you interrupt the mind's automatic cycle. You teach your brain to shift direction. You remove the exclusive focus from the problem and redirect it to God's faithfulness. In the Psalms, David often began by expressing anguish. He spoke about fear, persecution, the real pain he felt. But he rarely ended there. He chose to conclude by exalting the Lord's faithfulness. That structure is not accidental. It reveals an internal movement, from anxiety to trust, from pain to hope, from despair to surrender. You can do the same. You don't have to deny what you feel. Speak the truth of your heart. Say that you're tired. Say that you're afraid. But don't stop there. Don't end the prayer in pain. Add praise. Add gratitude. Add a declaration of trust. That shifts the direction of your emotional energy. Notice how your body reacts when you end a prayer only in complaint. It stays heavy. Your breathing remains shallow. Now, notice what happens when you finish by saying, "But I trust you." Something softens, not because the problem disappeared, but because you repositioned your soul. You chose not to let fear have the final word. Complaining prolongs the feeling of the wilderness. Praise creates space to perceive His presence even in the wilderness. And perhaps the miracle you're waiting for is being prepared, while God works not only in your circumstances, but in the inner structure of your heart. By transforming complaint into conscious gratitude, you're not ignoring reality. You're strengthening your faith in a mature, steady, and profound way. And that creates firmer ground to sustain whatever is coming next. There is a silent power in the words you choose to repeat. They are not just sounds released into the air. They shape inner images, create expectations, activate emotions, and influence decisions. When you declare something with conviction, your brain begins to search for evidence to confirm it. That's why declaring before you see is not an act of denying reality. It's an act of inner alignment. In the book of Psalms, we read, "I believe that I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living." That sentence carries a powerful spiritual structure. First comes, "I believe." Then comes, "I will see." Faith precedes evidence. Trust comes before manifestation. David did not say, "When I see, then I will believe." He reversed the usual order of the anxious mind. He chose to believe first. The most common mistake is waiting for something external to strengthen internal confidence. We wait for a clear sign, a visible confirmation, a concrete movement. And while that doesn't happen, our confidence fluctuates. But mature faith is born within. It is cultivated in silence, in the conscious repetition of promises, in the daily decision to trust even when the eyes still see no change. From an emotional standpoint, when you declare something in faith, you activate regions of the brain associated with hope and motivation. This reduces the feeling of helplessness. The declaration does not immediately alter the circumstance, but it does alter your internal state in relation to it. And when your internal state shifts, your actions shift, your posture changes, your energy changes. You move from someone who passively waits to someone who walks with active confidence. There is a powerful reversal of expectation here. Declaration comes before manifestation. A steady heart sustains the waiting. You don't declare to force God to act. You declare to align your soul with what you already believe is possible. You declare to remind yourself who God is. You declare to prevent fear from being the only dominant voice inside you. A simple practice can transform your morning. When you wake up, before you reach for your phone, before you dive into the day's worries, declare out loud a biblical promise related to your situation. If you're facing financial insecurity, declare provision. If you are facing fear, declare protection. If you are facing sadness, declare comfort. Do this every day. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Repetition creates neural pathways. Repetition strengthens conviction. Think about the metaphor of a seed. When someone plants, they see nothing the next day. The soil appears exactly the same, but something invisible has already begun. The seed breaks its own structure before it ever breaks through the ground. There is a hidden process. Declaring before you see is like planting. You place something in the soil of your heart and trust the timing of growth. You don't dig it up every day to check if it's working. You water it. You protect it. You wait with confidence. Maybe today you're looking at ground that seems barren. Maybe you're thinking nothing is happening. But what if the invisible is already in motion? What if, while you are learning to declare faith, God is strengthening your inner roots so that when the miracle manifests, you will be prepared to sustain it? Declare before you see. Believe before you touch. Trust before you fully understand. Not as a mechanical ritual, but as a conscious posture. And notice how, little by little, your breathing shifts, your gaze shifts, the way you move through your day shifts. The manifestation may have its own timing, but inner transformation begins now, in the moment you decide to say, I believe that I will see the goodness of the Lord. There are battles no one sees. They make no external noise, yet they are intense within. They are struggles against repetitive thoughts, against silent comparisons, against the feeling of falling behind. Often, what exhausts you most is not the problem itself, but the internal dialogue it generates. The mind begins to create negative scenarios. The heart tightens. The body goes on alert. And without realizing it, you are fighting an invisible war every single day. In the book of Psalms, especially in Psalm 149, praise is described as an instrument of victory that is deeply symbolic. To praise, to give thanks, to exalt. These are not merely religious expressions. They are spiritual positions. When you give thanks in the middle of the battle, you are declaring that fear will not have the final word. You are saying that hopelessness will not define your identity. You are choosing trust instead of panic, Many battles are not external, they are internal. It's the fear of not succeeding, the constant comparison with other people's lives, the feeling that God is more attentive to someone else's story than to yours. These thoughts drain your energy. They create a heavy internal atmosphere. And if they are not interrupted, they become automatic patterns. Gratitude in the middle of the fight functions as an act of spiritual warfare because it weakens the narrative of scarcity. When you give thanks, even without seeing the solution, you are training your brain to recognize that there is still provision, still care, still presence. The nervous system begins to move out of constant threat mode and into a more regulated state. The mind clears. The heart stabilizes, not because the problem has disappeared, but because you are no longer completely dominated by it. There is a simple practice that can transform this internal battlefield. Set aside a daily moment, even just 5 minutes, to praise God specifically for the solution that is still on its way, not in a fantasized way, not trying to force emotions, but with calm assurance, saying, "I thank you because you are working, even when I cannot see it." Do this every day. Repetition creates conviction. Repetition strengthens the spirit. There is a powerful episode in the story of Paul and Silas. They were imprisoned, chains on their feet, doors shut, no external evidence of deliverance. And yet, they began to sing. The atmosphere shifted before the chains fell. First, there was an atmospheric transformation. Then came physical freedom. This reveals a principle. Praise alters the internal and spiritual environment before it alters the external circumstance. Maybe your chains today are not visible. Maybe they are thoughts of inadequacy, memories of failure, fear of the future, and perhaps you are waiting for the chains to fall before you praise. But what if praise is part of the process that weakens those chains? What if gratitude is the key that begins to loosen what is tightening around your soul? The most intense war happens in the territory of the mind, and it is there that gratitude operates with silent strength. It does not shout. It does not impose. It does not demand. It declares with quiet firmness, God is still good. And as you repeat that, you begin to feel something shift. Your breathing deepens. Your gaze softens. Hope, even if small, begins to make room for itself. Giving thanks before the miracle is not passivity. It is positioning. It is saying that your trust does not depend solely on what you see. It is actively participating in the process of inner transformation. And when the inside is strengthened, the outside finds a heart prepared to sustain the victory. When you hear the phrase, "Watch God move faster," it's natural for something inside you to long for speed. After all, who doesn't want the pain to pass quickly? Who doesn't want the answer to arrive now? But there is a profound difference between trying to accelerate time and aligning the heart. It's not about pressuring God. It's about adjusting your inner posture so that when the movement happens, you're in harmony with it. Anxiety tends to say, "It's taking too long." Mature faith says, "It's being prepared." That difference may seem small, but it completely transforms your emotional state. When you interpret waiting as delay, your body tightens. When you interpret waiting as preparation, your body relaxes. Your breathing deepens. Your mind slows down. Your heart finds room to trust. In the book of Psalms, especially in Psalm 40, David says he waited patiently for the Lord. But he does not describe a passive, bitter, or resigned waiting. He speaks of exalting God, of declaring his faithfulness publicly. In other words, while he waited, he kept his heart aligned. He was not emotionally stagnant. He chose an active posture of trust. There is an invisible mistake we often make. We want external speed without internal transformation. We want the door to open, but we resist the process that prepares us to walk through it. We want the answer, but we avoid the growth that waiting produces. Yet waiting is not an empty interval. It is a space of formation. It works patiently on the areas of our character that still need strength. From an emotional perspective, when you transform thoughts of delay into declarations of promise, you are rewiring your brain. Instead of reinforcing the narrative of frustration, you strengthen the narrative of trust. Whenever the thought arises, "Why hasn't it happened yet?" consciously replace it with, "It is being prepared." Repeat it. Repeat it calmly. Repeat it until your body begins to believe it. Imagine dry ground waiting for rain. If the soil is hardened, the water runs off the surface and does not penetrate deeply. But when the soil is prepared, turned over, and cared for, the rain sinks in and nourishes the roots. The posture of your heart is like that soil. When it is open, humble, and grateful, manifestation finds space to settle. When it is closed, rigid, and suspicious, even blessings can be misinterpreted or poorly received. The speed of the miracle, then, is not only about the external clock, it is about internal readiness. Sometimes, when the heart finally aligns, when gratitude replaces murmuring, when declaration replaces fear, the perception of time shifts. What once seemed distant begins to feel near. What once seemed impossible begins to feel plausible. And that is not illusion, it is spiritual coherence. Maybe today you are tired of waiting. Maybe you are afraid to build expectations again. But ask yourself honestly, what is the condition of the soil of my heart? Has it been hardened by frustration? Or is it being prepared through gratitude? This question is not an accusation. It is an invitation to adjust your posture, an invitation to trust more deeply. When the ground is prepared, the rain meets no resistance. When the heart is aligned, manifestation meets no internal barriers. And even if external time remains the same, something begins to move more freely within you. And often, it is in that quiet alignment that God begins to act more clearly, not because he was pressured, but because he found a heart ready to receive. Arriving at this point, you may begin to notice that something has already started to shift. Perhaps the problem is still present. Perhaps the answer has not yet materialized. But there is a subtle difference within you. Your breathing may be deeper, your chest may feel less tight. This happens because gratitude does not only transform circumstances, it first transforms the posture of the soul. Now, I want to invite you to do something intentional. Slowly recite Psalm 100, not as an automatic reading, but as an active decision. When you say, "Make a joyful noise to the Lord," understand that joy here does not mean forced euphoria, but a chosen trust. When you say, "Enter his gates with thanksgiving," realize that you are crossing an inner threshold. You are leaving the posture of demand and entering the posture of gratitude. You are drawing near not as someone desperate, but as someone confident in divine care. Then, declare with intention what is written in Psalm 27:13. "I believe that I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living." Say it as if it were personal, as if you were speaking directly to your own soul. I believe. Repeat it inwardly. I believe. This repetition is not magic. It is alignment. It is the building of a steady conviction, not based on what your eyes can see, but on what your heart chooses to uphold. Understand something essential. Giving thanks before the miracle does not erase the pain. It does not deny the struggle. It does not minimize the intensity of what you feel, but it changes your position in relation to the pain. Instead of being crushed by it, you begin to move through it with awareness. Instead of being led by fear, you begin to be guided by trust. And this internal shift is profound. It is quiet, but it is real. Now, close your eyes for a moment. Breathe in slowly. Feel the air filling your lungs. Notice your body relaxing, even if only slightly, and pray sincerely. Lord, I thank you before I see. I praise you before I touch. I trust you before I understand. Allow those words to move from your thoughts down into your heart. Repeat them once more, slowly, with presence. Perhaps you still do not see visible victory. Perhaps the circumstances will appear unchanged when this message ends. But something inside you does not have to remain the same. A destiny of glory is not born only from what God does for us. It is also born from the faithful posture we choose to maintain while we wait. It is born from the decision to trust when it would be easier to doubt. It is born from the choice to give thanks when it would feel more comfortable to complain. There is a peace that does not depend on immediate answers. There is a security that does not depend on external signs. That peace begins when you understand that you are not abandoned in the process. That silence does not mean absence. That waiting does not mean forgetting. And that gratitude is the bridge between now and what is still to come. So, I leave you with a question to carry with you, not as pressure, but as an invitation. Can you give thanks now, even before you see? Can you trust now, even before you fully understand? If your answer is yes, even if it is quiet and hesitant, know that something has already begun to move, first within you, and in the right time, also around you. Remain for a few more moments in this atmosphere of silence. Don't rush to the next task. Don't immediately return to notifications. Stay here, because this is the space where transformation begins, not in noise, but in awareness. Perhaps over these minutes, you have realized that your greatest battle is not only for the answer you are waiting for, but for peace while you wait. And that is deeply human. We want guarantees. We want timelines. We want clear signs. But true faith matures when it learns to breathe in the space between the promise and its fulfillment. There is something profoundly powerful about giving thanks before the miracle, not because it forces God to move faster, but because it changes you. It changes your emotional frequency. It changes the way you interpret time. It changes your posture toward the unseen. When you give thanks before you see, you stop living in a constant state of threat and begin living in a state of trust. And trust transforms the body. It transforms the mind. It transforms decisions. A person who trusts walks differently, speaks differently, reacts differently. They do not panic with the same intensity. They do not fall into comparison as easily. They do not interpret every silence as abandonment. They begin to perceive movement even when there is no noise. Perhaps what has most delayed your perception of a miracle is not the absence of divine action, but the excess of internal noise, repeated fear, scarcity thoughts, constant self-criticism, a sense of unworthiness. Gratitude is like a gentle cloth that begins to clear that fog, not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily and faithfully. Remember, giving thanks before the miracle is not spiritualizing pain. It is spiritualizing the waiting. It is recognizing that the process is also sacred. That time also teaches. That silence also shapes. There are parts of you being strengthened precisely because the answer has not yet arrived. Roots are growing deeper while you learn to trust without seeing. What if God's true movement begins the moment you stop fighting time and start aligning your heart? What if the acceleration is not on the external clock, but in your internal clarity? When you stop resisting and begin cooperating with the process, something flows more lightly. The weight decreases, anxiety loses strength, hope stops being fragile and begins to stabilize. Repeat again within yourself. I give thanks before I see. Feel those words. Let them move from your thoughts down into your chest. I give thanks before I see, not as a formula, but as a conscious decision, as a spiritual position, as an act of emotional maturity. If today you are tired, let this gratitude be gentle, not forced. If today you are afraid, let this gratitude be small, but sincere. If today your faith feels fragile, let this gratitude be a whisper, not a shout. God does not require performative intensity. He honors sincerity. He honors the heart that, even while trembling, chooses to trust. You are not behind. You have not been forgotten. You are not praying in vain. There is care unfolding beyond what your eyes can perceive. There is silent work shaping circumstances and shaping you. And when the right moment comes, you will realize that the waiting was not wasted. It was preparation. Let that truth rest within you as you close this moment, not as a promise of instant miracles, but as a certainty of ongoing presence. You can rest. You can breathe. You can trust. You can give thanks now. And as you give thanks before you see, allow your soul to find peace in the simple assurance that there is a presence caring for you right now, in this very moment.